Welcome back, folks, to another episode of the FEX Insights podcast. I'm your host, Mark Montfort from NotCentralised, and here we are with the news. So last week, what was interesting was that we were at the Digital Economy Council conference, DEConference as it's called, and that was run by the Digital Economy Council of Australia, DECA. It used to be called Blockchain Australia, but as their mandate has increased to look at more than just blockchain, the name change has come as well. And this is their flagship conference run each year, and we got to participate in that. My colleague and I, Arturo, who you'll see later on the episode, both got to present. I presented on AI-related matters and talking about how blockchain and AI come together, and he was talking about agentic futures. So you'll see more of that later in the episode. Also at the conference, we saw the DFCRC reporting a highlight of $19 billion opportunity when it comes to how Australia can unlock this amount, which is approximately 1% of GDP. This is through advancements in digital finance. Key areas of this include foreign exchange potential, so $7.2 billion that could be unlocked in terms of efficiency gains from foreign exchange and blockchain. Cross-border payments up to $11.4 billion in benefits. Private and public credit markets as well, combined gains of $3.6 billion, and investment funds, an additional $1 billion in opportunities. This was thanks to research that was funded by the exchange group OKX in conjunction with the Digital Finance CRC. DFCRC Chief Scientist Talis Putnams emphasized the urgency, noting that without swift action, Australia might capture only a fraction of those benefits by 2030. DECA CEO Amy Rose Goody highlighted that this data is already influencing government policy decisions. You can see more of this in the article that we're showing here from Piper Alderman, as well as this original article from Mundak, which actually goes through more of the details there. Also, as part of the conference, AUSTRAC prepares for their VASP regulation, it was announced. They provided updates on its forthcoming virtual asset service provider regime, which will encompass a broader range of digital asset services, including custodial services and crypto ATMs. The regulator emphasized the importance of compliance with the travel rule from FATF. That stands for the Financial Action Task Force, which is known for their travel rule when it comes to crypto exchanges globally. Webinars and guidance materials are expected to assist providers in navigating the new regulatory landscape. Next in the news, we have JP Morgan introducing the JPMD on public blockchain. This is a groundbreaking move from JP Morgan as they announced the launch of JPMD, which is a USD-backed deposit token on Coinbase's Base blockchain. This marks the bank's first issuance of a token on a public Layer 2 network. This is signaling a shift towards integrating traditional banking with blockchain technology. JPMD aims to offer 24/7 on-chain settlement with minimal fees, targeting institutional clients seeking efficient, programmable financial instruments. Also in the news, we saw the launch of something called Crack. You heard that right. What a great name. This is a peer-to-peer payments app for fiat in crypto, as you can see from this LinkedIn article. Think PayPal meets MetaMask. It's all about 24/7 cross-border payments without banks. Kraken handles all of that internally. You can send and receive 300 plus assets, and you can also earn up to 4.1, even up to 10% on your balances. This is a joint venture between PayPal, Venmo, and Cash App. Seeing more of this kind of stuff is going to be interesting, especially where traditional finance meets crypto and DeFi-related apps. You see some of this stuff, especially in countries where they might not have the greatest in terms of infrastructure with payments, and they are able to innovate a lot more. So think of like the Philippines with things like PayMaya and Gcash, where not only are they able to send and receive money, whether it's crypto or otherwise, but they can also trade stocks, shares, etc., and even crypto. So more of these kinds of payments apps, which are combining the best of both worlds, both crypto and TradFi, are going to be on the horizon. And you can check this out in the article here. Also in the news, we saw our friends over at Red Belly Network. They are a layer 1 blockchain that has come out of the University of Sydney and the CSIRO. Now, what they've created is a community DAO that was launched overnight. And what it means is that the community is able to now get in and influence some of the decisions that go into what happens with the blockchain that we've got here. So they focus on tokenized real world assets. You'll see a lot more of them, but you can see here from this Medium article what kind of stuff that they're proposing. So you can see proposal submissions and community voting. Grant allocation is going to be on the books there. On-chain treasury tracking, engagement and credentials, and communication and feedback loops are all what the community DAO will enable. More of these types of features are going to be interesting in terms of how they can make their way into the mainstream. So typically in traditional finance, you will have just normal shareholders, and it's very limited in terms of the influence that they can provide. We'll see whether the DAO that Red Belly is creating here is going to offer the type of influence that people have always wanted. DAOs have always been around for at least the last couple of years, but in terms of the mistakes and the good things that have been done through them, we're going to see how Red Belly navigates all of that experience and makes it useful for Red Belly holders. So for more of that, check out this Medium article. And finally, in Red Belly news, you can also check out this Insights episode. It's a great name that they've got over there, similar to what we've got here. And every week, like us, they also have the Insights episode where I am lucky enough to be a host over there. In this week's one, we saw Vincent Grimoli, the CTO of Red Belly, talking about agents and blockchain. So when you think about agents, typically you're looking at generative AI, whether it's agentic workflows or just autonomous agents. But coupling that with blockchain means various new things can happen. So we talk about that in this episode, and in previous episodes. So just last week, Red Belly shared a presentation that Vincent did over at the Digital Economy Council conference up on the Gold Coast, where in partnership with Google, they were able to showcase some really interesting things when it comes to superannuation. In this episode that you see here, which we did online, Vincent goes into more detail, showcasing the demo and how that works for stocks. So really interesting stuff. If you're looking at the crossover or the convergence of blockchain and crypto, then definitely this is one worth checking out. And furthermore to that, we'll talk about Agentic AI and how it couples with blockchain in the deep dive episode I do with Arturo that you'll see here. That's it for the news, folks. I'm Mark. I will see you again next week for another roundup of the news. Now we get to the interview. And welcome back, folks. This is the guest segment, and we have a special guest here. This is Jonno Newman from TRM Labs. Jonno, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
Mate, you are a man of many talents. We've spoken before on the Oz DeFi podcast about a book that you wrote as part of the Fableration. You know, they're doing stuff with blockchain for publishers and readers and writers in that kind of community and stuff. So you've done books, but you also educate, and you're also at TRM Labs. But before we get into that, can you give us a bit of a background, like what led you to working in the space and what are you doing in this space?
Yeah, so firstly, talent is obviously subjective, but I appreciate the kind words. So what I do in this space, I'm an investigator at TRM Labs, and TRM Labs is a blockchain intelligence company. And so surfacing intelligence and insights for like DCEs and VASPs and DEXs that are using blockchain, and they want to be able to screen for that risk as you would in traditional finance. Also surfacing leads for investigators and like the tracing aspect and bringing blockchain into court, and then also working with national security agencies as well. And so my background and how I got here was law enforcement. So I spent 13 years with the police in South Australia, ended up specializing in cybercrime, and that was sort of where I fell down the crypto rabbit hole and fell in love with it and decided that I would join the private sector so I can do it full time, all day, every day.
Mate, it's pretty interesting. The last episode that we did, the guests, because there were guests, was when we were at the Digital Economy Council of Australia's conference, D-Conference, and we had fellow book publisher Amanda Wick. She was the former federal prosecutor worked on the January 6th committee, the investigation and whatnot. Went into crypto, was initially like investigating crypto, turned into an advocate. So from prosecutor to advocate, and from law enforcement to working in the space on the investigation side of things. Like, what led you to coming over into this space? Was there the allure of this new technology, or was it something else?
I think it definitely was. It was getting an appetite for it and becoming all consumed with cryptocurrency. And I think we discussed on the other podcast that when I first came across cryptocurrency and being specialized in cybercrime, cryptocurrency is obviously part of that. When I first tried to learn about crypto, it was intimidating. It scared me. I put it off and I put it to the side for as long as I could until I needed to do it. And I had trouble trying to learn by reading about cryptocurrency. And so for me, as a tactile learner, I wanted to do it. So I joined an Australian-based exchange. I set up a wallet on my phone and I transferred between the two. I looked at what that looked like on the blockchain because I knew what I should be expecting, and that helped like understand and interpret block explorers and those sort of things. And this was 2019, so comparatively late to crypto, but that was going into bull market. So crypto Twitter, just getting consumed by that and getting a passion for it and just wanting to be involved in that as much as I can. So when I left the place, I actually went and worked at Kraken and got to actually work an exchange and see what it was like under the hood, which was pretty cool.
I thought you were going to say that your in-field experience was, maybe going to North Korea, maybe going to one of the other hotspots where, crypto and various hacker groups like the Lazarus Group have come about. But I guess that segues into your current work over at TRM. You went from being an investigator in the traditional world and now looking at it in this digital asset space. What's the work that you do at TRM, and how does that kind of work?
Yeah, so it's definitely broad. If you think of crypto being a means of transferring value, so because of that, it touches many, many different crime types and many different predicate offenses. And really, if you profit from that, then you've got the laundering of that. So if you think of any crime type, whether that be terrorist financing, child abuse material, will that actually be hacks and exploits of cryptocurrency protocols themselves, which is when you start leaning into DPRK in North Korea and their hacks and how big they are in the space. And so it does vary day to day, but at TRM, we get to see that global view and of some of the most high profile incidents occurring, like, the Bybit hack, $1.5 billion is just mind boggling.
Where did TRM, before we get into the specific cases that you get to see and the unique lens and I guess tools that you guys have, where did TRM start? How did it get going? Where is it from?
So initially the founders were trying to build like a Pokemon Go type of app. So they were trying to look at the real world and that sort of mapping and things didn't really work out in that sense. But then they sort of stumbled across this concept of transaction monitoring on the blockchain and how that sort of works. And TRM was founded around 2017. So just when Ethereum was coming through and things were moving from a Bitcoin-only world to this multi-chain world that we're in today. And so under the hood, TRM was built to actually be across many, many different blockchains. And that's sort of where it came about. It's about identifying these relationships and surfacing this intelligence to make crypto a safer place. We hear about it, being used for scams and illicit purposes. That is such a small percentage. And if we want crypto and blockchain to actually succeed, we need to make sure that it is reputable and that it is a safer way that billions of people can onboard this financial opportunity. Then we need to make it safe to do that, and that's what TRM's all about.
What's really interesting is that a lot of people, maybe not necessarily the naysayers, but just people that aren't used to the space, and even myself, like I was late into it as well in 2021, but people just think of it as, oh, it's just scams and there's nothing more to it than that, and gambling and whatnot. But they don't realize that there are services, that there is a uniqueness to, and when I say services that, either help protect people or help investigate, or that there's a uniqueness to the way that data sits here, where unlike traditional markets, you can't see how and where people are transferring stuff to. Now, That's not to say that you can do much about it in some ways, unless they offboard to an exchange and then there's control. But, the uniqueness of the information here really is interesting. And I guess that leads to, you mentioned Bybit as one of the scams that had happened earlier this year. Can you talk us through that? What happened there for people that are unaware?
Yeah, look, I mean, I'll be honest. My main focus is the laundering of the funds versus the actual exploit. But my understanding was it involved blind signing, but also a compromise one of the providers they were using. So it was extremely targeted, and they basically had their pick of anyone using that service that they want to target, and so is extremely targeted towards Bybit in that instance. And so that's sort of how took place. And then it was various different forms of Ethereum and some derivatives of that were initially stolen. So all started on the Ethereum blockchain. But as is the case with DPRK and North Korea, how they move these funds, cross-chain swaps to different blockchains, going into mixing services, and they launder these proceeds for months at a time. So this is not just a quick fix. If you think of $1.5 billion of illicit finance sitting on the blockchain, that's a massive chunk of liquidity. So you can't just cash that out straight away. And they're very patient. So this is still ongoing today.
It's really interesting because there's been a bevy of whether you call them investigators, analysts, great ones out there like ZachXBT on Twitter or X, and many others. That locally even spoke about what had happened. But that's the how, and there was an exploit, or people the blind signing, and people maybe not checking and doing their own DD on things. Just things look good enough, then it's okay. But people relying on you to look at things in less detail. But the aftermath. So what is it that you guys would look at from an event like that? You mentioned the tracing side of things. Like, what are the what happens after something like this? And it sounds like it's a long haul, a marathon type of investigation if it takes time.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And I think when you look at the attack, it was targeted, but it was layered. So it wasn't purely just opportunistic or some due diligence oversight at that time. There were things in there where addresses were spoofed and all those things to try and add that level. So you'd have to be really switched on to have picked up on that. But yeah, it does take a long time. And when we talk about the likes of ZachXBT, and we can call it Twitter. We still call it CT. It doesn't really work with CX, but
no, yeah, exactly.
Really interesting. After that everyone was sort of following because it's this massive incident. This is where blockchain is transparent. So everyone's watching those funds when it first moved. Compounded by the fact that Bybit came out and offered bounties for the funds and recoveries, and so everyone was watching that. And in the first few days, most people were following that pretty accurately. They were going, "Oh, here's the Ethereum. Oh, we've seen some cross-chain swaps to other blockchains," and a lot of that stuff you can follow using open source and free tools. The problem is the next step is the mixers, and that's where if you don't know what you're looking at, people trace through the mixers. And so after that first couple of days or a week, everyone went from knowing exactly where it was to being confused, and people saying, "Here it is, it's gone over here, it's gone to that exchange," when that wasn't the case. So when it goes into mixers, it's a much more complicated process. But as I said, we're going to be following this for the next few months, if not years, before they fully deplete those funds.
Just on the mixers, there was this whole, when we were first getting into it in 2021 and 22, was the story about Tornado Cash and the developers that were jailed. The bemoaning of industry was that these guys aren't involved. Law enforcement saying that they were actively involved. One side saying it's just open source, the other side, saying something else. But regardless of all of that, like you talk about mixers, so people thought that, okay, after Tornado Cash, that was it. It was done. But mixers are still there. Is it just still, in this case, Tornado Cash, or are there others that are being used?
Heaps of others. Tornado Cash is interesting. So on that, when it actually got sanctioned by OFAC, and that did spark controversy because was the first time a piece of code had been sanctioned instead of an entity. And that sanctioning has since been revised by OFAC. So that was only a couple of months ago that was revised, but it was sanctioned for a period of time. And so when that happens, exchanges want to increase their transparency and identify when there's risk associated with that. Because from a risk and compliance perspective, mixers might be at a certain level, whereas a sanctioned entity is like a no-go, because you don't want to be dealing with sanctioned entities. Opens up a lot of reputational, financial harm for yourself, including potentially losing your license. So we saw, if you look at the volumes, and DPRK were using that significantly up until when it was sanctioned, which is why it was sanctioned. And then the liquidity just drops significantly from there. And so that did disperse. And one thing about DPRK is that while something is working, they'll keep using it. So while Tornado Cash was working, they kept using that. And then when we moved into some hacks in 2023, like Atomic Wallet hack and AlphaPo and Coins Paid, they were laundering through a Bitcoin mixer called Sinbad at the time. And again, you can see these massive spikes. They're providing the majority of liquidity to it, which is not, as far as operational security, not the best tactic. But then this becomes obvious to everyone, and OFAC come in and they sanction Sinbad the mixer because they can see that there's just so much tainted funds from DPRK. And so they move to another one. But primarily they're using Bitcoin-based mixers at the moment to launder their funds. Tornado Cash still gets used a little bit, but the volume there is died right down from its peak.
Yeah, it's really interesting. First up, that the group that does the sanctioning is OFAC, which, if you have a stronger accent, precisely sounds like how you should feel after something like that. But it's just fascinating that there is this constant like moving and chasing, and of all, and this is what we say as well, is like, of all the things that people would use in one way, yes, I hear the arguments that crypto is an easy tool to move things around, an easy type of currency to move things around, but at the same time as well, it's so traceable. So obviously, until more of these things get sanctioned, and so I can imagine a scenario where just DPRK or another bad, whether state or not actor, moves things around into a place and is able to extract some of that 1.5, let's just call it that, until it gets banned, and then moves to something else, and then again extracts a little bit of that 1.4 now until they have to move again. Is that how it's working? Is it a bit of whittling away or not?
Yeah, of course. There are, without going into too much detail, there are disruption opportunities while that is on the blockchain. So the common myth is that you've got to wait until it hits an exchange. There are some other avenues where you can intercept earlier, and some funds have been recovered for the Bybit hack. Now, when this is all done and dusted, how much of that 1.5 billion has been disrupted and seized and recovered, I don't know. It is going to be a percentage. It's not going to be all. There will be some that is able to be laundered and then goes into DPRK weapons of proliferation stream, basically. So that's the concern, and that's why it is problematic. You're looking at a country that it's been sanctioned themselves, and so don't have a GDP. They can't get export in. And so how do they get money to fund these things? It's a communist society that they need to, that they want to be able to get funds in, and this is a way that they can do it. But as you say about cryptocurrency, that there are pros that you can move that instantly, and that it's a means of transferring value to anywhere in the world, and that it's hard to capture. But conversely, there's also the cons for illicit actors as well, in that it is traceability. It's immutable. You can look at something that happened back in 2012, and that's still on the blockchain. So, there are definitely two sides of the coin. For me, as an investigator, I would much rather follow 100 Bitcoin than $1 million bag of cash that just went down the street. I would find that a lot harder to trace than a Bitcoin that's always going to be a record on the blockchain.
You heard it here first, folks. Jonno Newman of TRM will chase down even as low as 100. Actually, no, what am I talking about? A low 100 Bitcoin is worth more than $1 million. Ignore my bad math there. Current prices obviously precluding this, depending on when people are watching. But you speak to these things that have happened and, what it is that you've had as your experience and what you're currently doing at TRM, I want to leave folks with a little bit of like what you see currently. And obviously this is not crystal ball, like what are the things you need to do in the future and the types of threat vectors that will be there in the future, but just currently with the way the world works, the services that are out there and what you're seeing that the criminals are doing. What would you say are best practices that people just need to think about?
I think what you're trying to get me to say is the acronym AI here, basically, because I know that is it's like whispering sweet nothings into your ears.
You said it.
But it's true, all right? Like AI is touching so many different facets of life that it'd be pretty ignorant to not think that is going to accelerate the criminality and the reachability of victims and victimization at scale. When you think about things like scam compounds, and that is the bottleneck is that people power. They can only ring so many people. They can only talk to so many people. But when you start having AI bots that can perpetrate things like pig butchering and romance and investment scams, and they can do this bilingual in many, many different languages now. They don't need to have that native skill set. That this is going to be able to reach a lot more people for potential victimization. So on the flip side, AI can obviously be used for good. So we can use that for advanced detection and ways that we can identify things like deepfakes. The best practices is education. It's about how do we communicate that, what to look out for. And if you are going to be in this industry and you are doing self-custody, how do you know what you are signing? Don't sign anything you don't know. Don't or don't have a look at tokens that I don't remember getting that airdrop because it could be a malicious link. And so really it's about slow down, take a breath before you push send or interact. And I think from a personal and custody issue, that's something that we have to treat importantly.
Yeah, it is interesting seeing both sides of the aisle. Like people don't realize that some of these like scam and threat vectors and state or otherwise, they're almost like real businesses with their own HR departments. Maybe they have annual leave or not. I don't know, but I think it's kind of interesting that you see, okay, people. It's like the internet. When the internet first came out, people said, "Oh, it's going to be for no good" and all this kind of stuff. But there was much more good that came out of it. So we got over the threats that people saw back then. And the same thing right now. Like people see generative AI as doing, 30 seconds of a clip from us, and they can fake to any of our loved ones if they know or whatever. Multiple steps in the way they can fake these things and being used for bad, but like you said, being used for good. There was, I think, O2 or one of those like telco providers in the UK had a service where when it's dealing with these scammers, it's using AI to waste their time, sort of thing. And CBA is, I think, doing that now. I saw some article on that recently. But yeah, it's interesting. AI is going to be a real key thing. You guys are using I think without whatever that you can say, like, is there usage of AI or at least testing how it could be used to help with the investigation side of things?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we talk about traditional AI and machine learning, whatever you want to call it back then, that's always been a part of, blockchain intelligence. That's how you can propagate addresses based on characteristics. So that's always been a play. I think AI definitely has a place to play in this area as far as how do we analyze massive data sets to identify more trends and how can we scale maybe programmatic money laundering and use AI to actually map through that. And so there are many things that we use within TRM today to expedite those functions and get you there quicker. And from a compliance point of view, that is very, very important. When it comes to evidentiary and in the courtroom, you need to be able to validate and verify every step of that way. So it might be able to help you get to the end quicker, but you still need that human out there that to make that decision at each stage. And I think that's what the courts will expect when it comes to that type of behavior. But definitely need to be leveraging AI for good to combat when it's going to be used for bad. It is, tech is neutral. How it gets used is up to the end user. And I see far greater with AI, or far good good, bad English. I'll have to use ChatGPT to work out how to pronounce that better, how to come up with a better argument. But yeah, I see it doing more good than harm. We just need to make sure that we are creative with how we leverage it to counter it.
Yeah, massively agree. I can see things like where it is looking at previous patterns of behavior on an app to see if something all of a sudden looks different. It's been very good at that. We do a lot of stuff in the AI space, as you know, over here at NotCentralised, where we're working with the legal industry, for example. It's doing things like looking at previous days of court transcripts and seeing if there's inconsistencies from either side in what was said. But going back to all of it, on the blockchain space, what TRM Labs does, I think, is great. Your colleagues, yourself, do you guys have any standards that you provide to industry as like, here are the best kind of standards? Because I was going to say, just like ISO standards, and it's TRM. Maybe there should be TRM ISO, which may get mispronounced as tiramisu. Is there any standards or anything like that?
First of all, like your OFAC before, I can never think of OFAC ever again. And tiramisu is one of my favorite desserts, so I've lost my trail of thought a bit there as well. You've distracted me too close to lunchtime. I think there will be. At the moment, blockchain is so new, relatively new, that even from an investigative point of view, there's no real overarching body. I mean, we've got our own certifications. Other providers have their certifications about what best practices could look like. I don't think we're there yet as far as an industry standard. We obviously work with companies like DeFi protocols, and we can provide what we are seeing in the industry and what risk looks like and how to apply risk-based models to their risk appetite and their type of profile. But as far as like an ISO standard, I don't think we're there yet, but it'd be a great idea, especially for smart contracts. I mean, we see a lot of vulnerabilities in smart contracts. Having a standard there would go a long way.
I hope so. And, it'll just give me more reasons to have bad puns, dad jokes, et cetera, et cetera. But Jonno, where can people best find you? I guess LinkedIn, elsewhere?
Yeah, LinkedIn's the best way for anything other than lowbrow. If you like to have a giggle with educating yourself when it comes to crypto, and I use education quite lightly. Blockchain for Blockheads on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all those fun apps that I'm learning to navigate.
Yep, that have not been banned yet. That we will see. In any case, we'll put those links in the show notes. Jonno, thanks you so much for your time. There's been a lot of great insights here, and we'll bring you back on for another round.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the work you're doing and spreading this education. It's great. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Welcome back, folks, and we are here for episode 5. This is the deep dive, and we're at it again. Not in the studio this time, but that's okay because the content is still just as good. Arturo, thanks for joining me again.
And thank you for having me.
How's it going? How's your week been so far? I know we're recording this, at a funny time, it's not on a Friday, but what have you been up to? What have you been prepping at the moment?
There's it's a lot of work with regards to just planning and structuring the execution of this big pilot project that we have going on. And it's really interesting because on the one hand, we're talking about tokenized markets and thinking about that in terms of blockchain. But, if you're actually thinking about what a real tokenized market looks like, you can't neglect the effect of agents, right?
Yeah,
Which
you mean
what we're going to be talking about.
Exactly. You mean AI agents when you say that, right?
Correct.
What's interesting is that people think of AI as still very much like a chatbot. Some may have heard of AI agents and seen how crazy they can get in terms of just having autonomy and just going wild and out there and not getting quite the result that we're looking at. But there is a bit more nuance to it, which we'll get into. And I guess as this shift goes from just AI as it stands, like chatbots, to agentic AI, where it performs multiple steps, somewhat autonomous kind of actions, and all of that kind of stuff, it demands these new guardrails. which sets the stage for what blockchain can bring as more than just a data ledger. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's it's very important to take a few steps back away from the functionality and the features of agents themselves, right, and not use the terms MCP and pumping and all of the tech jargon, because then you very easily get lost in what the purpose is of what you're trying to achieve, right? So in this tokenized market pilot, we're looking at issuing bonds. We're looking at creating asset pools that are used as collaterals for these bonds. We're looking at all of these different steps in a value chain that happen on a day-to-day basis in TradFi. Now, all of these different things are done by people, right? There's communication between different firms. These firms, they will, for example, submit a request to create a trust with a certain number of parameters, effectively a trust deed, right? They'll tell that to the law firm, and that is done in collaboration with the trust that is going to be managing, the trustee that is effectively managing the trust. And there are all these things that people do, and they communicate via email and so forth, right? And during this process, there was a lot of negotiation as well. You could think of the negotiation also as an ideation, right? It's anything that is not a final decision or a final settlement, which is typically where the blockchain comes in, right? But there's a lot of things that happen before blockchain or before that final thing of value, the value transfer happens, right? So if we then think about everything that a person does and try to imagine how a system supports that person, not takes over their job, but supports them, right? So, for example, you want to create an investment memorandum. Well, most of them are actually quite templatized, right? And sure, lawyers might not agree with that, but in principle, as a non-lawyer, they are, right? So an agent helps you, for example, in defining the specific description of the purpose of the trust deed, right? You tell the agent, I want to create a trust with X, Y, Z purpose. Well, the agent can help you with that very, very much, right? They can help you proofread and verify that what has been created makes sense. Now, they can also, instead of you needing to send out an email and send out a properly described PDF with all of the parameters, they can actually just communicate that to the other firm that is effectively doing it, that is supposed to be executing the job. And the other firm doesn't need to have a person that actually reads through everything in detail, but it could actually be an agent that takes up that information, structures it up, and plans it out, and so forth. So all of a sudden, you can start seeing that there's a lot of streamlining in the communication and in the interaction between these different firms that actually leads to settlement, right? So then you start thinking about, well, these agents are going to be communicating between themselves, i.e. firm A and firm B are going to be communicated in parts by using these agents, so that human beings end up only agreeing to the final or during a few steps during that transaction, right? Definitely the final part of the transaction, but some entering steps to ensure that that the thing is at least going in the right direction. Then you start to think that you actually need to start putting guardrails, right? And again, this is where blockchain also comes in. It's not only about booking in the final transaction or managing the life cycle of actual payments, but it's also about setting policies, right? So you want to have policies that are immutable, policies that are enacted only by the right people or the right agents, and the concepts of private keys, or let's call it cryptographic identity, together with the ability to only allow certain actions to be booked on a blockchain if those actions follow certain policies. makes the use of these agents so much safer, right? Very much in the same way as those processes exist for people. Like one person is not allowed to transfer $1 billion, right? It'd have to pass through a big or a long set of checks, and this is where we're implementing blockchain policy validation for these agents. There's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely the need to have people see that it's not just blockchain is this payments layer, but also as we get to the next topic around AI governance, it's this rules engine where if there are a set of, as you said, immutable rules that must be followed. The cool thing about technology or software in this case, let's just break it down to that. It can be made so that these rules are very black and white. They don't fall to the fallibilities of humans where we get tired, we don't check things. If the rules say that these things need to be checked, that it can only be signed off by certain whitelisted wallets, the rules that we know in blockchain can really help plug the gap of the things that we've been seeing that AI has been used for somewhat maybe dangerously, especially with things like deep fakes, people, being able to create and mimic things that look like it is something that you need to sign off, or, in the case of the person that they thought that it was part of their organization, but it was actually a deep fake person that had joined their meeting. But having this tamper-proof kind of enforcement of rules is really important when AI agents, especially when they operate on behalf of users, or especially organizations, we need that cryptographic trust. Can you unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think I'm going to go a little bit geeky here, and there's this line in Star Wars that just comes to mind, which is that what was it? Only Siths think in absolutes.
Yep,
right.
That's the one.
Right. So you here have these two technologies that one is the grayscale, or one is that workflow where you have a bit of flexibility and leeway, and there isn't only one way to get to the right answer, and there might be multiple answers that are correct or okay, and it's really context specific and it's dynamic and so forth, and that's effectively what agents or AI agents allow us to do. And then you have the absolutes, right, where you can't have that ambiguity of, was it you or was it me that signed this transaction? I mean, we're kind of close. We kind of work for the same organization, or we're kind of in the same country. So it doesn't really matter, right? It's either you or it's me, and there's nothing else. Or I am executing a transaction that does this very specific set of things, and I'm only allowed to execute that transaction if other things have happened, right? So blockchain gives you that absolute check of whatever it is that you're doing within your workflow, and then you have the agents that sit on top and do the flexible, adaptive part of your workflow. Right. So if we then talk about governance, then you could imagine that there are two sets of governance. One, which is governance set on the prompt side, right? You want your agents to behave within certain rules, but you're not necessarily sure that those rules are going to be followed to its entirety. And some of the rules, maybe it doesn't really matter if you go over the line slightly. It's okay. But then others where you have really, really, really strong policies, that's where you set the blockchain rules in place, and you make that separation between an agent defining the intent to execute something, that intent being filtered through or passing through blockchain enabled policies, and then execution, right? And once you start designing systems that way, then all of a sudden you get to a really powerful place, because absolutes are not always good, but they are necessary in a few places.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I guess I could say that with regards to all of this, what do you think? Let's describe some scenarios. Let's paint a picture for people. Doesn't have to be a specific scenario that you're working on, but what could a workflow look like where it is the case that humans are basically becoming more reviewers rather than doers? They set the scene, they have their set of agents orchestrating things, they're talking to a set of immutable rules that might be from their organization, it might be within the division, etc. But it is a new way of working. What does that future look like? And I think that we're going to be able to test some of these things pretty soon with some of the projects that you're looking at. But just paint a picture for people to what would that day-to-day kind of look like for a person using these tools?
Imagine, I think that we've all faced this, at least on the tech side, a few times, and we've also faced it on the investment side, where if I am outsourcing a piece of work offshore, when it comes to development, I need to be extremely clear about what I want. I almost need to define a blueprint. And many times I don't have that blueprint, so I need to go through this ideation stage, this prototyping stage, to properly understand the problem, and then we have the blueprint that gets offshored. Similarly, if I want to minimize the amount of time that a lawyer spends with me, because it's expensive, and I want them to draft an investment memorandum, then I need to be extremely prescriptive over what it is that I want them to do, or rather, what it is that I want to do, and frame it in a context that is correct and that works for a lawyer, so that they don't need to ask me 1,000 questions and take more time and be able to draft whatever it is that needs to happen, right? So, because this is a bit of a tech-based conversation, the parallel applies to the current way in which systems communicate. Effectively, API-based, right? So APIs are extremely clear. They're not ambiguous. There's, these are the parameters that you have. This is the information that you'll get. There's no real reasoning around it. This is what it is. And if you don't give the API the right ask, then you get the wrong answer, right? It's kind of like garbage in, garbage out. And I know that this idea also fits into AI, but definitely not to the same extent as it does in API-based communication. So now imagine if you could engage with a lawyer, or you could engage with a development shop through agents, right? So you kind of define, well, this is what I know. You give this information to your agents, and it could be a lot, but you may not necessarily know exactly how to piece that together. But here it is. And at the same time, you don't want to be sending everything to the partner. Maybe, just following the best principles, you only share what you need to share, but you don't know what you need to share. So nevertheless, it's there. So in a scenario where the development shop or the lawyer has their own agents, and they're very quickly able to get the information that you've sent to them, or rather that your agent has sent to them, see what it is, ask the questions. This communication could happen, in the matter of a few minutes, whereas it would have taken human beings, most likely days, to start answering all of that. And all of a sudden, after a bit of a back and forth, you end up with a much more cohesive way of modeling the problem that you want to solve, right? Either explaining to the lawyer, this is what I need, or to the development shop, these are the blueprints of the piece of software, right? So what we've effectively discussed there is how you can create a much faster iterative way of communicating between machines to solve this problem in ways that we really can't do today. And that fits into finance, or into really any service-based engagement where you don't know exactly what it is that you need, but you still need it.
Yeah, especially where there's a lot of information that needs to be passed and reviewed and processed by humans. We all work to a set of rules already, whether it's our own business or it's a business that we're consulting with, or it's a business that we work for as an employee. We are all abiding by these sets of rules, but by having agents, or AI in this case, abide by a set of rules, maybe even better than we can, and having an immutable way that you can see the actions that they take. And yeah, we can use blockchain for payments. We can use it for auditing. We can use it for guidance of the rules, and we can use it to perhaps even share information without having to move the data around in the case of zero knowledge proofs. And coupled with a smart system like AI, when used in the right way, and we're talking generative AI, for anyone that thinks we're just talking general artificial intelligence, this is just specifically Gen AI. It really makes for some interesting things that we can build with these Lego blocks. And we'll dive into that more in future episodes. But just for this one, any closing words for people to have a think about?
Yeah, maybe just make it a little bit more tangible. So imagine that you have a value chain or a workflow where you're securitizing a pool of receivables or invoices that are originated by a specific party, and this you want to set up a securitization process that is actually quite flexible, because you're doing it a lot, or you're doing many small different series of the same type of product. So here it's a great example, because you start off with having a description of the pool of assets, or maybe you start having a description of what type of assets you want to be eligible for the pool, right? And that's the perfect job for a set of AI agents to help you describe these assets, or describe the properties that the assets may need, based on the goal, right? The goal maybe is that you want to have an average yield of something, or you want to have an average risk of something, right? So right there, agents help you identify these criteria. The next set is that once you have identified the criteria, you actually have to create the trust deed for the entity that effectively holds the assets. That's a piece of work that could be supported to a very large extent by AI agents, both in the communication phase, the ideation phase, and the structuring phase, and then also in the creation of the IM, right? You could even have scenarios where IMs are, let's call it, translated to the right knowledge base depending on the customer base. And one good example is, for example, the difference between the expected knowledge of a retail customer versus a wholesale customer, right? So in all of these different stages where you definitely have, or you can definitely identify the role of a blockchain, because this is about financial transactions, you also see that there is that overlay of agents that really help with executing and streamlining the whole process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's certainly new ways that we can see how AI can be beneficial to what it is that So, and sorry, but both ways. Like AI can definitely help on the blockchain side of things, but I think more and more people are going to realize how blockchain can help the other way. We're going to dive more into agents, especially when that use case comes out. I'm sure that we're going to be able to showcase a whole lot more and make that visible in terms of what is out there. So for the meantime, Arturo, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thank you.